Witch, the first Witcher book. Last time when we read it, Geralt had defeated the Strika, but he had gotten injured. I believe that we're past that now. I think he is healed. The Witcher books do kind of jump around in timeline a little bit. So at one point we read that he was at like the Temple of Melitelli and getting healed there. Now he is at this house with this bear man. Um, there was some other section. I can't remember what it was, but it seemed like maybe not to be super related right now, but maybe be related later. So we'll see. Um, but yeah, he has just met this bear man, which is being known as the monster at this point, and he is coming into the house. The house is somehow controlled by the bear man with magic, and he had just been asking, Geralt, are you really not afraid of me? Geralt said, should I be? The monster looked around, cleared his throat, and yanked up his baggy trousers. Pox on it, what's the harm of a guest in the house? It's not every day I meet someone who doesn't run away or faint at the sight of me. Alright then, if you're a weary but honest traveler, I invite you in. But if you're a brigand or a thief, then I warn you, this house does what I tell it to. We already read that part. What's, blah 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 blah. What's that around your neck, dear guest? Have a look. The creature took the medallion in his paw, lifted it up to his eyes, tightening the chain around Geralt's neck a little. The animal has an unpleasant expression. What is it? My guild's badge. Ah, you make muzzles, no doubt. This way, please. Light! The center of the large room, completely devoid of windows, was taken up by a huge oak table, empty apart from an enormous black candlestick, slowly turning green and covered with trickles of hardened wax. At the monster's command, the candles lit and flickered, brightening the interior a little. One wall was hung with weapons, compositions of round shields, partisans, javelins, and guisarmes, heavy sabers and axes. Half of the adjacent wall was taken up by an enormous fireplace, above which hung rows of flaking and peeling portraits. The wall facing the entrance was filled with hunting trophies, elks and stag antlers whose branching racks threw long shadows across the grinning mounted heads of wild boar, bear, and lynx, over the ruffled and phrased wings of eagles and hawks. The place of honor was filled by a rock dragon's head, tainted brown, damaged and leaking stuffing. Geralt examined it more closely. My grandpa killed it, said the monster, throwing a huge log onto the depths of the fireplace. It was probably the last one in the vicinity when it got itself killed. Sit, my dear guest. You're hungry? I won't deny it, dear host. The monster sat on the table, lowered his head, clasped his hairy paws over his stomach, muttered something while twiddling his enormous thumbs, then suddenly roared, thumping the table with his paw. Dishes and platters rattled like pewter and silver. Chalices jingled like crystal. There was a smell of roast meat, garlic, marjoram, and nutmeg. Geralt did not show any surprise. Yes, the monster rubbed his hands. This is better than service, isn't it? Help yourself, dear guest. Here's some fowl. Here's some boar ham. Here, Terran of, I don't know what, something. And here we have some hazel grouse. Pox, no, it's partridge. I got the spells muddled up. Eat up, eat up. This is proper real food, don't worry. I'm not worried. Geralt tore the fowl in two. I forgot, snorted the monster, that you're not timid. What shall I call you? Geralt. And your name, dear host? Nivellen. But they call me Degen or Fangor around here, and they use me to frighten children. The monster poured the contents of an enormous chalice down his throat, after which he sank his fingers in the terrine, tearing half of it from the bowl in one go. Frighten children, repeated Geralt with his mouth full. Without any reason, no doubt? Of course not. Your health, Geralt. And yours, Nivellen. How's the wine? Have you noticed that it's made from grapes and not apples? If you don't like it, I'll conjure up a different one. Thank you, it's not bad. Are your magical powers innate? No, I've had them since growing this. This trap, that is. I don't know how it happened myself, but the house does whatever I wish. Nothing very big. I can conjure up food, drink, clothes, clean linen, hot water, soap. Any woman can do that, and without using magic at that. I can open and close windows and doors. I can light a fire. Nothing very remarkable. It's something. And this trap you call it, have you had it for long? 12 years. How did it happen? What's it got to do with you? Pour yourself some wine. With pleasure. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm just asking out of curiosity. An acceptable reason, the monster said and laughed loudly. But I don't accept it. It's got nothing to do with you and that's that. But just to satisfy your curiosity a little, I'll show you what I used to look like. Look at those portraits. The first from the chimney is my father. The second, Pox only knows, and the third is me. Can you see it? Beneath the dust and spiderwebs, a nondescript man with a bloated, sad, spotty face and watery eyes looked down from the painting. Geralt, who was no stranger to the way portrait painters tended to flatter their clients, nodded. Can you see it? Repeated Nivellen, baring his fangs. I can. Who are you? I don't understand. You don't understand? The monster raised his head. His eyes shone like a cat's. My portrait is hung beyond the candlelight. I can see it, but I'm not human. At least not at the moment. A human looking at my portrait would get up, go closer, and no doubt have to take the candlestick with him. You didn't do that, so the conclusion is simple. But I'm asking you plainly. Are you human? Geralt didn't lower his eyes. If that's the way you put it. He answered for a moment's silence, then not quite. Surely it wouldn't be tactless if I ask in that case what you are. A witcher. Nivellen repeated after a moment. If I remember rightly, witches earn their living in an interesting way. They kill monsters for money. You remember correctly. Silence fell again. Candle flames pulsated, flicking upward in thin wisps of fire, glimmering in the cut crystal chalices. Cascades of wax trickled down the candlestick. Get some water. Nivellen sat still, lightly twitching his enormous ears. Let's assume, he said finally, that you draw your sword before I jump on you. Let's assume you even managed to cut me down. With my weight, that won't stop me. I'll take you down through sheer momentum. And then it's teeth that it'll decide. What do you think, Witcher? Which one of us has a better chance if it comes to biting each other's throats? Geralt, setting the carafe's pewter stopper with his thumb, poured himself some wine, took a sip, and leaned back into his chair. He was watching the monster with a smile, an exceptionally ugly one. Yes, Nivellen said slowly, digging at the corners of his jaws with a claw. One has to admit that you can answer questions without using many words. It'll be interesting to see how you manage the next one. Who paid you to deal with me? No one. I'm here by accident. You're not lying by any chance? I'm not in the habit of lying. And what are you in the habit of doing? I've heard about witchers. They abduct tiny children whom they feed with magic herbs. The ones who survive become witchers themselves, sorcerers with inhuman powers. They're taught to kill, and all human feelings and reactions are trained out of them. They're turned into monsters in order to kill other monsters. I've heard said it's high time someone started hunting witchers, as there are fewer and fewer monsters and more witchers. Do have some partridge before it's completely cold. Nivellen took the partridge from the dish, put it between his jaws and crunched it like a piece of toast, bones cracking as they were crushed between his teeth. Why didn't you say anything? He asked indistinctly, swallowing. How much of the rumors about you witchers is true? Hi, Arcade. It's going good. I hope you're doing well also. Practically nothing. And what's a lie? That there are fewer and fewer monsters. True. There's a fair number of them. Nivellen bared his fangs. One is sitting in front of you, wondering if he did the right thing by inviting you in. I don't like your guild badge right from the start, dear guest. You aren't a monster, Nivellen, the Witcher said dryly. Pox, that's something new. So what am I, cranberry pudding? A flock of wild geese south on a sad November morning? No. Maybe I'm the virtue that a miller's buxom daughter lost in spring. Well, Geralt, tell me what I am. Can't you see I'm shaking with curiosity? You're not a monster. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to touch the silver tray. And in no way could you hold my medallion. Ha! Nivellen roared so powerfully that the candle flames fell horizontal for a moment. Today, very clearly, is a day for revealing great and terrible secrets. Now I'm going to be told that I grew these ears because I didn't like milky porridge as a child. No, Nivellen, Geralt said calmly. It happened because of a spell. I'm sure you know who cast the spell. And what if I do? In many cases, a spell can be uncast. Thank you for the subscription! Next to our kid, thank you so much, I appreciate you. Thank you. You, as a witcher, can uncast spells in many cases. I can. Do you want me to try? No, I don't. The monster opened his jaws and poked out his tongue, 2 span long and very red. Surprised you, hasn't it? That it has, admitted Geralt. The monster giggled and lounged in his armchair. I knew that would, he said. Pour yourself some more, get comfortable, and I'll tell you the whole story. Witcher or not, you've got an honest face and I feel like talking. Pour yourself more. There's none left. Pox on it! The monster cleared his throat, then thumped the table with his paw again. A large earthenware demijohn in a wicker basket appeared next to 2 empty carafes from nowhere. Nivellen tore off the sealing wax with his teeth. As you've no doubt noticed, he began, pouring the wine, this is quite a remote area. It's a long way to the nearest human settlement. It's because, you see, my father and my grandfather too in his time didn't make themselves particularly loved by our neighbors and their merchants using the highway. If anyone went astray here and my father spotted them from the tower, they lost, at best, their fortune. And a couple of the nearer settlements were burnt because father decided the levies were being paid tardily. Not many people liked my father. Except for me, naturally. I cried awfully when what was left of my father after a blow from a 2-handed sword was brought home on a cart one day. Grandpa didn't take part in robbery anymore because, ever since he was hit on the head with a morningstar, he had a terrible stutter. He dribbled and rarely made it to the privy on time. As their heir, I had to lead the gang. Drink some water. I was young at the time, Nivellen continued. Some idiotic viewer 125, thank you for the follow. Thank you so much, I appreciate that. I was young at the time, Nivellen continued. A real milksop, so the lads in the crew wanted me around their little fingers in a flash. I was as much in command of them as a fat piglet as a pack of wolves. We soon began doing things which father would never have allowed had he been alive. I'll spare you the details and get straight to the point. One day we took ourselves as far as Gelibol near Mert and robbed a temple. A young priestess was there, too. Which temple, Nivellen? Pox only knows, but it must have been a bad one. There were skulls and bones on the altar, I remember, and a green fire was burning. It stank like nobody's business. But to the point. The lads overpowered the priestess and stripped her. Then said I had to become a man. Well, I became a man, stupid little snot that I was. And while I was achieving manhood, the priestess spat into my face and screamed something. What? That I was a monster in human skin. That I'd be a monster in monster skin. Something about love. Blood. I can't remember. She must have had the dagger, a little one, hidden in her hair. She killed herself and then... We fled from there, Geralt. I'm telling you, we nearly wore our horses out. It was a bad temple. Go on. Then it was as the priestess had said. A few days later I woke up, and as the servants saw me, they screamed and took to their heels. I went to the mirror. You see, Geralt, I panicked, had some sort of an attack. I remember it almost through a haze. To put it briefly, corpses fell. Several. I used whatever came to hand, and suddenly I'd become very strong. And the house helped as best it could. Doors slammed, furniture flew in the air. Fires broke out. Whoever could get out ran away in a panic. My aunt and cousin, the lads from the crew. What am I saying? Even the dogs howled and cowered. My cat, Glutton, ran away. Even my aunt's parrot kicked the bucket out of fear. I was alone, roaring, howling, going mad, smashing whatever came to hand. Mainly mirrors. Nivellen paused, sighed, and sniffed. When the attack was over, he resumed after a while, it was already too late. I was alone. I couldn't explain to anyone that only my appearance had changed. That although in this horrible shape I was just a stupid youngster, sobbing over the servant's body in an empty manner. Mini Pro 1010, thank you for following. I appreciate that so much. I was afraid they'd come back and kill me before I could explain, but nobody returned. The monster grew silent for a moment and wiped his nose on his sleeve. I don't want to go back to those first months, Geralt. It still leaves me shaking when I recall them. I'll get to the point. For a long time, a very long time, I sat in the manor quiet as a mouse, not stirring from the place. If anyone appeared, which rarely happened, I wouldn't go out. I'd tell the house to slam the shutters a couple of times, or I'd roar through the gargoyle, and that was usually enough for the would-be guest to leave in a hurry. So that's how it was. Until one day I looked out of the window one pale dawn, and what did I see? Some trespasser stealing a rose from my aunt's bush. It wasn't just any old rose bush. These are blue roses from Nazaire. It was grandfather who brought the seedlings. I flew into a fury and jumped outside. The fat trespasser, when he got his voice back, he lost it when he saw me, squealed that he only wanted a few flowers for his daughter. That I should spare him, spare his life and his health. I was just ready to kick him out of the main gate when I remembered something. Stories Lenka, my nanny, the old bag, used to tell me. Pox on it, I thought. If pretty girls turn frogs into princesses or the other way around, then maybe there's a grain of truth in these stories. A chance. I leapt 4 yards, roared so loud wild vines tumbled from the wall, and I yelled, "Your daughter or your life!" Nothing better came to mind. The merchant, for he was a merchant, began to weep, and then confessed that his daughter was only 8. Are you laughing? No. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry over my shitty fate. I felt sorry for the old traitor. I couldn't watch him shake like that. I invited him inside, made him welcome, and when he was leaving, I poured gold and precious stones in his bag. There was still a fair fortune in the cellar from Father's Day. I hadn't quite known what to do with it, so I could allow myself this gesture. The merchant beamed and thanked me so profusely that he slobbered all over himself. He must have boasted about this adventure somewhere, because not 2 weeks had gone by when another merchant appeared. He had a pretty large bag ready with him, and a daughter, also pretty large. Nivellen extended his legs under the table and stretched until the armchair creaked. I came to an understanding with the merchant in no time, he continued. He'd leave her with me for a year. I had to help him load the sack onto his meal. He wouldn't have managed it otherwise. And the girl? She had fits at the sight of me for a while. She really thought I'd eat her. But after a month we were eating at the same table, chatting and going for long walks. She was kind and remarkably smart, and I'd get tongue-tied when I talked to her. You see, Geralt, I was always shy with girls. Always made a laughingstock of myself, even with wenches from the cowshed, with dung up to their knees. Girls the lads from the crew turned over this way and that at will. Even they made fun of me. To say nothing of having a maw like this. I couldn't even make myself say anything about why I had paid so dearly for a year of her life. The year dragged like the stench following marauding troops until, at last, the merchant arrived and took her away. I locked myself in the house, resigned, and didn't react for several months to any of the guests who turned up with daughters. But after a year spent with company, I realized how hard it was to live without anyone to talk to. The monster made a noise, which was supposed to be a sigh, but came out more like a hiccup. The next one, he said after a while, was called Fen. She was small, bright, and chirpy, a real Goldcrest. She wasn't frightened of me at all. Once on the anniversary of my first haircut, my coming of age, we'd both drunk too much mead, and straight after I jumped out of bed and ran to the mirror. I must admit I was disappointed and despondent. The trap was the same as it ever was, if with a slightly more stupid expression. And they say the wisdom of ages is to be found in fairy tales. It's not worth a shit wisdom like that, Geralt. Welcome back, Ravenmia. Well, Fen quickly tried to make me forget my worries. She was a jolly girl, I tell you. Do you know what she thought up? We'd both frighten unwanted guests. Imagine. A guest like that enters the courtyard, looks around, and then, with a roar, I charge at him on all fours with Fen, completely naked, sitting on my back and blowing my grandfather's hunting horn. Nivellen shook with laughter, the white of his fangs flashing. Fen, he continued, Stayed with me for a year, then returned to her family with a huge dowry. She was preparing to marry a tavern owner, a widower. Carry on, Nivellen, this is interesting. You think so? Said the monster, scratching himself between the ears with a rasping sound. All right. The next one, Primula, was the daughter of an impoverished knight. The knight, when he got here, had a skinny horse, a rusty cuirass, and incredible depths. He was as hideous as cow dung, I tell you, Geralt, and spread a similar smell. Primula, I'd wager my right hand, was conceived while he was at war. She was quite pretty. I didn't frighten her either, which isn't surprising, really. As I compared to her parent, I might have appeared quite comely. She had, as it turned out, quite a temperament, and I, having regained some self-confidence, seized the moment by the horns. After 2 weeks, Primula and I already had a very close relationship. She'd like to pull me by the ears and shout, "Bite me to death, you animal, and tear me apart, you beast," and other equally idiotic things. I ran to the mirror and the brakes, but just imagine, Geralt. I looked at myself with growing anxiety. Less and less did I long to return to my former shape. You see, Geralt, I used to be a weakling, and now I'd become a strapping fellow. I'd keep getting ill. I'd cough. My nose would run, but I don't catch anything. And my teeth. You wouldn't believe how rotten my teeth had been. And now, I can bite through the leg of a chair. Do you want me to bite a chair leg? No, I don't. No water. Maybe that's good. The monster opened his mouth wide. My showing off used to amuse the girls, and there aren't many whole chairs left in the house. Nivellen yawned, his enormous tongue rolling up into a tube. This talking has made me tired, Geralt. Briefly, there were 2 after Primula, Ilka and Vinimira. Everything happened in the same way to the point of boredom. First, a mixture of fear and reserve, then a thread of sympathy. They reinforced by small but precious gifts. Then, bite me, eat me up. Daddy's return, a tender farewell, and an increasingly discernible depletion of the treasury. I decided to take longer breaks to be alone. Of course, I'd long ago stopped believing that a virgin's kiss would transform the way I looked, and I'd come to terms with it. And what's more, I'd come to the conclusion that things were fine as they were, and that there weren't any need for changes. Really, no changes, Nivellen. It's true. I have a horse's health, which came with the way I look, for one. Secondly, my being different works on girls like an aphrodisiac. Don't laugh, I'm certain that as a human, I'd have to give a mighty good chase to get a girl like, for example, Vinimira, who was an extremely beautiful maid. I don't suppose she'd have glanced twice at the fellow in the portrait. And thirdly, safety. Father had enemies, and a couple of them had survived. People whom the crew, under my pitiful leadership, had sent to their graves, had relatives. There's gold in the cellar. If it wasn't for the fear inspired by me, somebody would come and get it, if only peasants with pitchforks. There's a meatball in the way. Meatball, you gotta move over. You seem quite sure, Geralt remarked, playing with an empty chalice, that you haven't offended anyone in your present shape. No father, no daughter, no relative or daughter's betrothed. Leave off, Geralt! Nivellen was indignant. What are you talking about? The fathers couldn't contain themselves for joy. I told you I was incredibly generous. And the daughters? You didn't see them when they got here in dresses of sackcloths, their little hands raw from washing, their shoulders stooped from carrying buckets. Even after 2 weeks with me, Primula still had marks on her back and thighs from the strap her knightly father had beaten her with. They walked around like princesses here, carried nothing but a fan, and didn't even know where the kitchen was. I dressed them up and covered them with trinkets. At the click of a finger, I'd conjure up hot water in the tin bath father had plundered from my mother at Isengard. Can you imagine? A tin bath! There's hardly a regent, what am I saying? Hardly a lord who's got a tin bath at home. This was a house from a fairy tale for them, Geralt. As far as bed is concerned, well, pox on it. Virtue is rarer today than a rock dragon. I didn't force any of them, Geralt. But you suspected someone had paid me to kill you. Who would have? Scoundrel who wanted the contents of my cellar but didn't have any more daughters. Nivellen said empathetically. Human greed knows no limits. And nobody else. And nobody else. They both remained silent, gazing at the nervous flicker of the candle flames. Nivellen, the Witcher said suddenly. Are you alone now? Witcher, answered the monster at a moment's hesitation. I think that, in principle, I ought to insult you, take you by the neck and throw you down the stairs. Do you know why? Because you treat me like a dimwit. I notice how you've been cocking your ears and glancing at the door. You know perfectly well that I don't live alone, am I right? You are. I'm sorry. Pox on your apologies. Have you seen her? Yes, in the forest, by the gate. The Shiwai merchants and daughters have been leaving here empty-handed for some time. So you know about that too? Yes, she's the reason. Do you mind if I ask whether... Yes, I do mind. Silence again. Oh, well, it's up to you, the monster finally said, getting up. Thanks for your hospitality, dear host. Time I was on my way. Quite right. Nivellen also got up. For certain reasons, I can't offer you a room in the manor for the night, and I don't encourage you to spend the night in these woods. Ever since the area's been deserted, it's been bad at night here. You ought to get back to the highway before dusk. I'll bear that in mind, Nivellen. Are you sure you don't need my help? The monster looked at him askance. You think you could help me? You'd be able to lift this from me? I wasn't only thinking about that sort of help. You didn't answer my question. Although you probably did. You wouldn't be able to. Geralt looked him straight in the eyes. You had some bad luck, he said. Of all the temples in Gelibol and Nimnar Valley, you picked the Church of Coromagtera, the lion-head spider. In order to lift up the curse thrown by the priestess of Coromagtera, you need knowledge and powers which I don't possess. And who does? So you are interested after all. You said things were fine as they are. As they are, yes, but not as they might be. I'm afraid that... What are you afraid of? The monster stopped at the door to the room and turned. I've had enough of your questions, Witcher. Would you keep asking instead of answering mine? Obviously, you've got to be asked in the right way. Listen, for some time now I've had hideous dreams. Maybe the word monstrous would be more accurate. Am I right to be afraid? Briefly, please. Have you ever had muddy feet after waking from such a dream? Conifer needles in your sheets? No. And have... No, briefly, please. You're rightly afraid. Can anything be done about it? Briefly, please. No. Finally. Let's go. I'll see you out. In the courtyard, as Geralt was adjusting the saddlebags, Nivellen stroked the mare's nostrils and patted her neck. Roach, pleased with the caress, lowered her head. Animals like me, boasted the monster, and I like them too. My cat, Glutton, ran away at the beginning, but she came back later. For a long time, she was the only living creature who kept me company in my misfortune. Verena, too. He broke off with a grimace. Geralt smiled. Does she like cats, too? Birds. Nivellen buried his teeth. I gave myself away, pox on it. But what's the harm? She isn't another merchant's daughter, Geralt, or another attempt to find a grain of truth in old folk tales. It's serious. We love each other. If you laugh, I'll sock you one. Geralt didn't laugh. You know your Verena, he said, is probably a Rusalka? I suspected as much. Slim, dark. She rarely speaks in a language I don't know. She doesn't eat human food. Oops. She disappears into the forest for days on end, then comes back. Is that typical? More or less. The Witcher tightened Roach's girth strap. No doubt you think she wouldn't return if you were to become human. I'm sure of it. You know how frightened Rusalkas are of people? Hardly anybody's seen a Rusalka from up close. But Verena and I... Pox on it. Take care, Geralt. Take care, Nivellen. The Witcher prodded the mare in the side with his heel and made toward the gate. The monster shuffled along at his side.
Boy, I think you're thirsty.
Magnum, I was just drinking water. I right at the same time. Thank you for the hydrate redeem. I double hydrated just for you. Geralt? Yes. I'm not as stupid as you think. You came here following the tracks of one of the merchants who've been here lately. Has something happened to one of them? Yes. The last was here 3 days ago. With his daughter. Not one of the prettiest, by the way. I commanded the house to close all its doors and shutters and give no sign of life. They wandered around the courtyard and left. The girl picked a rose from my aunt's rosebush and pinned it to her dress. Look for them somewhere else. But be careful. This is a horrible area. I told you that the forest isn't the safest of places at nights. Ugly things are heard and seen. Thanks, Nivellen. I'll remember about you. Who knows, maybe I'll find someone who... Maybe yes and maybe no. It's my problem, Geralt, my life and my punishment. I've learned to put up with it. I've got used to it. If it gets worse, I'll get used to that too. And if it gets far worse, don't look for anybody. Come here yourself and put an end to it. As a witcher. Take care, Geralt. Nivellen turned and marched briskly toward the manor. He didn't look around again. Part 3. The area was deserted, wild, and ominously inhospitable. Geralt didn't return to the highway before dusk. He didn't want to take a roundabout route, so he took a shortcut through the forest. He spent the night on the bare summit of a high hill, his sword on his knees, beside a tiny campfire into which, every now and then, he threw wisps of monkshood. In the middle of the night, he noticed the glow of a fire far away in the valley. He heard mad howling and singing, and a sound which could have only been the screaming of a tortured woman. When dawn had barely broken, he made his way there to find nothing but a trampled glade and charred bones and still warm ashes. Something sitting on the crown of an enormous oak shrieked and hissed. It could have been a harpy or an ordinary wildcat. The Witcher didn't stop to check. Part 4. About midday, while Roach was drinking at the spring, the mare neighed piercingly and backed away, baring her yellow teeth and chewing her bit. Geralt calmed her with a sign. Then he noticed a regular ring formed by the caps of reddish mushrooms peering from the moss. You're becoming a real hysteric, Roach, he said. This is just an ordinary devil's ring. What's the fuss? The mare snorted, turning her head towards him. The Witcher rubbed his forehead, frowned, and grew thoughtful. Then he leapt into the saddle, turned the horse around, and started back, following his own tracks. Animals like me, he muttered. Sorry, Roach, it turns out you've got more brains than me. Part 5. The mare flattened her ears against her skull and snorted, throwing up earth with her hooves. She didn't want to go. Geralt didn't calm her with the sign. He jumped from the saddle and threw the reins over the horse's head. He no longer had his old sword in his lizard skin sheath on his back. Its place was filled with a shining, beautiful weapon with a cruciform and slender, well-weighted hilt, ending in a spherical pommel made of white metal. This time the gate didn't open for him. It was already open, just as he had left it. He heard singing. He didn't understand the words. He couldn't even identify the language. He didn't need to. The Witcher felt and understood the very nature, the essence, of this quiet, piercing song, which flowed through the veins in a wave of nauseous, overpowering menace. The singing broke off abruptly, and then he saw her. She was clinging to the back of the dolphin in the dried-up fountain, embracing the moss-overgrown stone with her tiny hands, so pale they seemed transparent. Beneath her storm of tangled black hair shone huge, wide-open eyes the color of anthracite. Geralt slowly drew closer, his steps soft and springy, tracing a semicircle from the wall and blue rosebush. The creature glued to the dolphin's back followed him with her eyes, turning her petite face with an expression of longing and full of charm. She could still hear her song, even though her thin, pale lips were held tight, and not the slightest sound emerged from them. The Witcher halted at a distance of 10 paces. His sword, slowly drawn from its black enameled sheath, glistened and glowed above his head. It's silver, he said. This blade is silver. The pale face did not flinch. The anthracite eyes did not change expression. You're so like a Rusalka, the Witcher continued calmly, that you could deceive anyone. All the more as you're a rare bird, black-haired one. But horses are never mistaken. They recognize creatures like you instinctively and perfectly. What are you? I think you're a Mula or an Alpor. An ordinary vampire couldn't come out in the sun. The corners of the pale lips quivered and turned up a little. Nivellen attracted you with that shape of his, didn't he? You evoked his dreams. I can guess what sort of dreams they were, and I pity him. The creature didn't move. You like birds, continued the Witcher, but that doesn't stop you biting the necks of people of both sexes, does it? You and Nivellen, indeed. A beautiful couple you'd make, a monster and a vampire. Rulers of a forest castle. You dominate the whole area in a flash. You eternally thirsty for blood, and he, your guardian, a murderer at your surface. A blind tool. But first he had to become a true monster, not a human being in a monster's mask. The huge black eyes narrowed. Where is he, black-haired one? You were singing, so you've drunk some blood. You've taken the ultimate measure, which means you haven't managed to enslave his mind, am I right? The black-tressed head nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and the corners of the mouth turned up even more. The tiny little face took on an eerie expression. No doubt you consider yourself the lady of this manor now? And nod, this time clearer. Are you a mullah? A slow shake of the head. The hiss which reverberated through his bones could only have come from the pale, ghastly smiling lips, although the Witcher didn't see them move. Alcor? Denial. The Witcher backed away and clasped the hilt of his sword tighter. That means you're... The corners of the lips started to turn up higher and higher. The lips flew open. A Bruxa! The Witcher shouted, throwing himself toward the fountain. From behind the pale lips glistened white, spiky fangs. The vampire jumped up, arched her back like a leopard, and screamed. The wave of sound hit the Witcher like a battering ram, depriving him of breath, crushing his ribs, piercing his ears and brain with thorns of pain. Flying backward, he just managed to cross his wrist in the sign of the heliotrope. The spell cushioned some of his impact with the wall, but even so, the world grew dark and the remainder of his breath burst from his lungs in a groan. On the dolphin's back, in the stone circle of dried-up fountain where a dainty girl in a white dress had sat just a moment ago, an enormous black bat flattened its glossy body, opening its long, narrow jaws wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. The membranous wings spread and flapped silently. The creature charged at the Witcher like an arrow fired from a crossbow. Geralt, with the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, shouted a spell and threw his hand, fingers spread in the sign of Quen, out in front of him. The bat, hissing, turned abruptly, then chuckled and veered up into the air, before diving down vertically, straight at the nape of the Witcher's neck. Geralt jumped aside, slashed, and missed. The bat smoothly, gracefully drew in a wing, circled around him and attacked anew, opening its eyeless, toothed snout wide. Geralt waited, sword held with both hands, always pointed in the creature's direction. At the last moment he jumped, not to the side but forward, dealing a swinging cut which made the air howl. He missed. It was so unexpected that he lost his rhythm and dodged a fraction of a second too late. He felt the beast's talons tear his cheek, and a damp, velvety wing slapped against his neck. He curled up on the spot, transferred the weight of his body to his right leg, and slashed backwards sharply, missing the amazingly agile creature again. The bat beat its wings, soared up, and glided toward the fountain. As the crooked claws scraped against the stone casing, its monstrous, slobbering snout was already blurring, morphing, disappearing, although the pale little lips which were taking its place couldn't quite hide the murderous fangs. The Bruxa howled piercingly, modulating her voice into a macabre tune, glared at the Witcher with eyes full of hatred, and screamed again. The sound wave was so powerful it broke through the sign. Black and red circles spun in Geralt's eyes. His temples and the crown of his head throbbed. Through the pain drilling in his ears, he began to hear voices of wailing and moaning. The sound of flute and oboe, the rustle of a gale. The skin on his face grew numb and cold. He fell to one knee and shook his head. The black bat floated toward him silently, opening its toothy jaws. Geralt, still stunned by the scream, reacted instinctively. He jumped up, and in a flash, matching the tempo of his movement to the speed of the monster's flight, took 3 steps forward, dodged, turned a semicircle, and then, quick as a thought, delivered a 2-handed blow. The blade met with no resistance, almost no resistance. He heard a scream, but this time it was a scream of pain caused by the touch of silver. The wailing Bruxa was morphing on the dolphin's back. On her white dress, slightly above her left breast, a red stain was visible beneath a slash no longer than a finger. The Witcher ground his teeth, The cut, which should have sundered the beast in two, had been nothing but a scratch. "Shout, vampire," he growled, wiping the blood from his cheek. "Scream your guts out, lose your strength, and then I'll slash your pretty little head off." You will be the first to grow weak, sorcerer. I will kill you." The Brux's lips didn't move, but the Witcher heard the sounds clearly. They resounded in his head, echoing and reverberating as if underwater. "We shall see," he muttered through his teeth as he walked, bent over, in the direction of the fountain. "I will kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. We shall see." "Verena!" Nivellen, his head hanging low and both hands clinging to the doorframe, stumbled from the mansion. He staggered toward the fountain, waving his paws unsteadily. Blood stained the cuff of his tunic. "Verena!" he roared again. The Bruxa jerked her head in his direction. Geralt, raising his sword to strike, jumped towards her, but the vampire's reaction was much faster. A sharp scream and another sound wave knocked the Witcher from his feet. He tumbled onto his back and scraped against the gravel of the path. The Bruxa arched and tensed to jump, her fangs flashing like daggers. Nivellen, spreading his paws like a bear, tried to grab her, but she screamed straight into his face, throwing him back against the wooden scaffolding under the wall, which broke with a sharp crash and buried him beneath a stack of timber. Geralt was already on his feet, running, tracing a semicircle around the courtyard, trying to draw the Brux's attention away from Nivellen. The vampire, fluttering her white dress, scurried straight at him, light as a butterfly, barely touching the ground. She was no longer screaming, no longer trying to morph. The Witcher knew she was tired, and that she was lethal. Behind Geralt's back, Nivellen was clattering under the scaffolding, roaring. Geralt leapt to the left, executing a short moulinette with his sword to confuse the Bruxa gliding toward him. White and black, windblown, terrible. He'd underestimated her. She screamed. He didn't make the sign in time, flew backward until he thumped against the wall. The pain in his spine shot all the way to the tips of his fingers, paralyzed his shoulders, cut him down at the legs. He fell to his knees. The Bruxa, wailing melodiously, jumped towards him. "Verena!" roared Nivellen. She turned, and Nivellen forced the sharp, broken end of a 3-meter-long pole between her breasts. She didn't shout. She only sighed. The Witcher shook, hearing the sigh. They stood there. Nivellen, on widespread legs, was wielding the pole in both hands, one end firmly secured under his arm. The Bruxa, like a white butterfly on a pin, hung on the other end of the stake, clutching it with both hands. The vampire exhaled excruciatingly, and suddenly pressed herself hard against the stake. Geralt watched a red stain bloom on her black, on the white dress through which the broken tip emerged in a geyser of blood. Hideous, almost obscene. Nivellen screamed, took one step back, then another, retreating from her, but he didn't let go of the pole and dragged the Bruxa behind him. One more step and he leaned back against the mansion. The end of the pole scraped against the wall. Slowly, as if a caress, the Bruxa moved her tiny hands along the stake, stretched her arms out to their full length, grasped the pole hard and pulled on it again. Over a meter of bloodied wood already protruding from her back. Her eyes were wide open, her head flung back. Her sighs became more frequent and rhythmic, turning into a ruckling wheeze. Geralt stood, but fascinated by the scene, still couldn't make himself act. He heard words resounding dully within his skull, as if echoing around a cold, damp dungeon. Mine, or nobody's. I love you. Love you. Another terrible, vibrating sigh, choking in blood. The Bruxa moved further along the pole and stretched out her arms. Nivellen roared desperately and, without letting go of the stake, tried to push the vampire as far from himself as possible, but in vain. She pulled herself closer and grabbed him by the head. He wailed horrifically and tossed his hairy head. The Bruxa moved along the pole again and tilted her head toward Nivellen's throat. The fangs flashed a blinding white. Geralt jumped. Every move he made, every step was part of his nature, hard-learned, automatic, and lethally sure. 3 quick steps, and the third, like 100 such steps before, finished on the left leg with a strong, firm stamp. a twist of his torso, and a sharp, forceful cut.
Yeah.
Psycho VT! Hello! Scuffexolotl raid. Welcome in, guys! Welcome in. We're just doing some story time. I'm just reading everybody some of the first Witcher book. I hope you guys will enjoy this as well. We're currently fighting against a Bruxa, and it's gotten a little bit sad here. And let me drink some water. Hi Psycho, how are you doing? Alright, we're gonna keep going on. He saw her eyes. Nothing could change now. He heard the voice. Nothing. He yelled down to drown the word which she was repeating. Nothing could change. He cut. He struck decisively, like 100 times before, with the center of the blade, and immediately, following the rhythm of the movement, took a fourth step and half a turn. The blade, freed by the half turn, floated after him, shining, drawing a fan of red droplets in its wake. The streaming raven-black hair floated in the air. Floated, floated, floated. The head fell onto the gravel. There are fewer and fewer monsters. And I? What am I? Who's shouting? The birds? The woman in a sheepskin jacket and blue dress? The roses from Nazaire? You're gonna pass out soon? Oh, maybe I'll be able to help you fall asleep with the reading. This is kind of, been trying to do this as like a nice bedtime story time for everybody. Everybody seems to be, start kind of chilling out or falling asleep before we end it for the night. So we'll just keep going for a little while. See if everybody's how quiet, how empty, what emptiness within me. Felt audiobooks when? Oh my god, I would actually love to do audiobooks. Then, curled up in a bundle, sheltering his head in his arms and shaking with twitches and shivers, was lying in the nettles by the manor wall. Get up. The young, handsome, well-built man with a pale complexion, lying by the wall, raised his head and looked around. His eyes were vague. He rubbed them with his knuckles. He looked at his hands, felt his face. He moaned quietly and, putting his finger in his mouth, ran it along his gums for a long time. He grasped his face again and moaned as he touched the floor, 4 bloody, swollen streaks on his cheek. He burst out sobbing, then laughed. Geralt! How come? How did this... Geralt! Get up, Nivellen. Get up and come along. I've got some medicine in my saddlebags. We both need it. I've no longer got... I haven't, have I? Geralt? Why? The Witcher helped him get up, trying not to look at the tiny hands so pale as to be transparent, clenched around the pole stuck between the small breasts which were now plastered with a wet fabric. Nivellen moaned again. Farina. Don't look. Let's go. They crossed the courtyard, holding each other up, and passed the blue rosebush. Nivellen kept touching his face with his free hand. Incredible, Geralt. After so many years? How's it possible? There's a grain of truth in every fairy tale, the Witcher said quietly. Love and blood. They both possess a mighty power. Wizards and learned men have been racking their brains over this for years, but they haven't arrived at anything other than... That what, Geralt? It has to be true love. Aww. It was like the Beauty and the Beast, except it was the vampire and the beast. Alright. Chapter 3. The Voice of Reason. I'm Falwick, Count of Moen, and this night is Talus from Dornall. Geralt bowed cursorily, looking at the knights. Both wore armor and crimson cloaks with the emblem of the white rose on their left shoulder. He was somewhat surprised, as so far as he knew.
Well, looks like it's time to stretch.
Oh, thank you for the stretch. This is the actual book. This is the first Witcher book. He was somewhat surprised, as so far as he knew, there was no commandery of that order in the neighborhood. Neneki, to all appearances, smiling lightheartedly and at ease, noticed his surprise. These nobly born gentlemen, she said casually, settling herself more comfortably in her throne-like armchair, are in the service of Duke Hereward, who governs these lands most mercifully. Prince, Tylus, the younger of the knights, corrected her empathetically, fixing his hostile pale eyes on the priestess. Prince Hereward. Let's not waste time with details and titles, Neniki smiled mockingly. In my day, only those with royal blood were addressed as princes. But now it seems titles don't mean so much. Let's get back to our introductions and why the Knights of the White Rose are visiting my humble temple. You know, Geralt, that the chapter is requesting investitures from the order from Hereward, which is why so many Knights of the Rose have entered his service. And a number of locals like Tails here have taken vows and assumed the red cloak, which becomes him so well. My honor, the Witcher bowed once more, just as cursorily as before. I doubt it, the priestess remarked coldly. They haven't come here to honor you, quite the opposite. They've arrived demanding that you leave as soon as possible. In short, they're here to chase you out. You consider that an honor? I don't. I consider it an insult. The noble knights have troubled themselves for no reason, Geralt shrugged. I don't intend to settle here. I'm leaving of my own accord without any additional incentives, and soon at that. Immediately, growled Tails, with not a moment's delay. The prince orders. In this temple I give the orders, interrupted Neniki in a cold, authoritative voice. I usually try to ensure my orders don't conflict too much with Hereward's politics, as far as those politics are logical and understandable. In this case, they are irrational, so I won't treat them any more seriously than they deserve. Geralt, Witcher of Rivia, is my guest. His stay is a pleasure to me, so he will stay in the temple for as long as he wishes. You have the audacity to contradict the prince, woman? Taylor shouted, then threw his cloak back over his shoulder to reveal his grooved, brass-edged breastplate in all splendor. You dare to question our ruler's authority? Quiet, Neniki snapped, narrowing her eyes. Lower your voice. Have a care who you speak to like that. I know who I'm talking to. The knight advanced a step. Falwick, the older knight, grabbed him firmly by the elbow and squeezed until the armor-plated gauntlet grated. Taylor yanked furiously. And my words express the prince's will, the lord of this estate. We've got soldiers in the yard, woman. Neniki reached into the purse at her belt and took out a small porcelain jar. I really don't know, she said calmly, what will happen if I smash this container at your feet, Tylus. Maybe your lungs will burst. Maybe you'll grow fur. Or maybe both, who knows. Only merciful Melitelli. You dare threaten me with your spells, priestess? Our soldiers! If any one of your soldiers touches one of Melitelli's priestesses, they will hang, before dusk, from the Acadias along the road to town, and they know that very well, as do you, Tylus, so stop acting like a fool. I delivered you, you shitty brat, and I pity your mother, but don't tempt fate, and don't force me to teach you manners. All right, the Witcher butted in, growing bored. It looks as though I'm becoming the cause of a serious conflict, and I don't see why I should. Sir Falwick, you look more level-headed than your companion, who, I see, is beside himself with youthful enthusiasm. Listen, Falwick, I assure you that I will leave in a few days. I also assure you that I have no intention to work here, to undertake any commissions or orders. I'm not here as a Witcher, but on personal business. Count Falwick met his eyes, and Geralt realized his mistake. There was pure, unwavering hatred in the White Rose Knight's eyes. The Witcher was sure that it was not Duke Hereward who was chasing him out, but Falwick and his like. The knight turned to Neniki, bowed with respect, and began to speak. He spoke calmly and politely. He spoke logically, but Geralt knew Falwick was lying through his teeth. Venerable Neniki, I ask your forgiveness, but Prince Hereward would not tolerate the presence of the Witcher on his land. It is of no importance if he is hunting monsters or claims to be here on personal business. The prince knows that Witchers do not undertake personal business, but they do attract trouble like a magnet filings. The wizards are rebelling and writing petitions. The druids are threatening. I don't see why Geralt should bear the consequences of the unruliness of local wizards and druids. Sorry, Cloud stepped on my keyboard. Interrupted the priestess. Since when has Hereward been interested in either's opinion? Enough of this discussion, Falwick stiffened. Have I not made myself sufficiently clear, Venerable Neniki? I will make it so clear as so it can't be clearer. Neither the prince nor the chapter of the order will tolerate the presence of this witcher, Geralt, the Butcher of Blaviken, in Elander for one more day. This isn't Elander! The priestess sprang from her chair. This is the Temple of Melitelli, and I, Neneki, the High Priestess of Melitelli, will not tolerate your presence on the temple grounds a minute longer, sirs. Sir Falwick, the witcher said quietly, listen to the voice of reason. I don't want any trouble, nor do I believe that you particularly care for it. I'll leave this neighborhood within 3 days. No, Neneki, don't say anything, please. It's time for me to be on my way. 3 days, I don't ask for more. And you're right not to ask. The priestess spoke before Falwick could react. Did you hear, boys? The witcher remained here for 3 days because that's his fancy. And I, priestess of Great Melitelli, will for those 3 days be his host, for that is my fancy. Tell that to Hereward. No, not to Hereward. Tell that to his wife, the noble Ermelia, asking that if she wants to continue receiving an uninterrupted supply of aphrodisiacs from my pharmacy, she'd better calm her duke down. Let her curb his humor and whims, which look ever more like the symptoms of idiocy. Enough! Tylus shouted so shrilly that his voice broke into a falsetto. I don't intend to stand by and listen as some charlatan insults my lord and his wife. I will not let such an insult pass unnoticed. It is the Order of the White Roses which will rule here now. It's the end of your nests of darkness and superstitions, and I, as a Knight of the White Roses— Shut up, you brat, interrupted Geralt, smiling nastily. Halt your uncontrolled tongue. You speak to a lady who deserves respect, especially from a Knight of the White Rose. Admittedly, to become one, it's enough lately to pay 1,000 Novigrad crowns into the chapter's treasury, so the order's full of sons of moneylenders and tailors. But surely some manners have survived? But maybe I'm mistaken. Tylus grew pale and reached to his side. The cats keep jumping up on my desk. Oh my god. Meatball, please. Ah! Just constantly been jumping up. Tylus grew pale and reached to his side. Sir Falwick, said Geralt, not ceasing to smile. If he draws his sword, I'll take it from him and beat the stodgy-nosed little brat's arse with the flat of his blade. And then I'll batter down the door with him. Tylus, his hands shaking, pulled an iron gauntlet from his belt, and with a crash threw it to the ground at the witcher's feet. I'll wash away insult to the order with your blood, mutant, he yelled. On beaten ground! Go into the yard! You've dropped something, son, Neneki said calmly. So pick it up. We don't leave rubbish here. This is a temple. Falwick, take that fool from here, or this will end in grief. You know what you're to tell Hereward, and I'll write a personal letter to him. You don't look like trustworthy messengers to me. Get out of here. You can find your way out, I hope. Falwick, restraining the engaged Tylus with an iron grip, bowed, his armor chattering. Then he looked the witcher in the eyes. The witcher didn't smile. Falwick threw his crimson cloak over his shoulders. This wasn't our last visit, Venerable Neneki, he said. We'll be back. That's just what I'm afraid of, replied the priestess coldly. The displeasure's mine. Alright. That is it for tonight. Next time, we will start on this next chapter, or part, or whatever you want to call it, of the Lesser Evil. But for now, that's going to be it. So thank you guys for hanging out for story time. I love reading you guys' stories.